On July 16, 2025, Russia issued a direct threat to the United States. If Trump moves forward, Kyiv and Lviv will be turned into a new Hiroshima. The source of the threat? Alexander Sladkov, a Russian military correspondent and a prominent figure on state-controlled television in Moscow. For many analysts, he's considered one of Putin's unofficial mouthpieces. This statement, broadcast live on national television, wasn't a slip-up or an exaggeration. It was a calculated warning delivered just moments after a bombshell announcement from Donald Trump. The United States would take on the role of Ukraine's arsenal, selling billions of dollars in high-tech weapons to NATO allies, who would then transfer that firepower to Kyiv. In effect, Trump handed Moscow an ultimatum. You have 50 days to negotiate peace. If not, prepare for crushing sanctions and a new wave of lethal weapons crossing the border. The Kremlin's response came in the form of a nuclear threat. As the world scrambles to understand whether this is just another bluff or the opening move in something far more dangerous, a new era of tension is unfolding, and the game between Washington and Moscow is entering uncharted territory. Instead of repeating Biden's model, which relied on direct shipments of billions of dollars in weapons to Kyiv, Trump introduced something entirely new. He called it an economic victory, but in practice, it's a geopolitical strategy for outsourced warfare. Now the United States no longer donates weapons. It mass produces them, sells them to NATO allies, and those allies are the ones responsible for delivering the military systems to Ukraine. On the surface, Trump's plan might look like a bureaucratic maneuver, but in practice, it changes the entire dynamic of the war. The U.S. stops giving weapons away and starts profiting massively. In 2025 alone, estimates point to over $10 billion in signed contracts. Meanwhile, NATO countries seize the opportunity to strengthen their own arsenals while offloading older equipment to Ukraine. And Trump positions himself strategically, far enough to avoid direct accusations of involvement, yet close enough to maintain control behind the scenes. Officially, he's just selling weapons, but in reality, he's dictating the pace of the war. Germany, Poland, and the United Kingdom have already signed deals to receive Patriot missiles, smart bombs, and long-range weapons, systems that, until now, only the U.S. had access to, and more. According to internal sources, this new shipment includes powerful offensive weapons capable of striking targets inside Russia itself, something Biden never would have approved. While Europe takes on the political risk of arming Ukraine, Trump collects the profits and tightens the pressure on Putin, all without putting American troops on the ground. But there's one dangerous detail. The Kremlin knows exactly who's pulling the strings behind the curtain. 2 days after Trump's announcement came Russia's response, not with tanks or missiles, but with carefully chosen words broadcast to millions. On national television, Russian military correspondent Alexander Sladkov, a prominent figure aligned with the Kremlin, declared that if the United States continued arming Ukraine, Russia would be forced to turn Kyiv and Lviv into new Hiroshimas. This wasn't a slip. It was a message. And more than that, it was a threat with specific names, cities, and historical symbolism. Sladkov wasn't speaking for himself. Just like other figures such as Dmitry Medvedev and Vladimir Solovyov, he operates as an unofficial mouthpiece for the Kremlin, testing the West's limits with inflammatory rhetoric. These voices serve as trial balloons. If the reaction is weak, the threat becomes official policy. If backlash is strong, the government distances itself, claiming it was just a personal opinion. But this time the tone was different. The threat didn't come in the heat of battle or in response to a direct attack. It came from something deeper, the growing sense that Russia's regime is cornered. Back in 2023, Russia revised its nuclear doctrine to allow the use of tactical nuclear weapons not only in cases of invasion, but also in response to what it considers existential threats. And right now, what Trump is doing may qualify as exactly that. Ukraine's efforts to retake lost territory, the arrival of Western weapons capable of striking deep inside Russian soil, and the rapid militarization of Ukraine's borders, all of this could be seen by Putin as the beginning of the end. And when an authoritarian regime sees no way out, the nuclear button stops being symbolic and becomes a real option. For years, Russia's nuclear threats were seen as empty rhetoric, a game of intimidation aimed at shaking the West without real intention to act. But that narrative has started to shift, quietly and dangerously. Now it's no longer necessary to suffer a direct attack or be on the brink of collapse to press the button. All it takes is for the Kremlin to believe it's facing an existential threat. And that definition is intentionally vague. It could mean losing occupied territory, seeing Western missiles appear at its borders, or simply perceiving the regime as under threat. This shift has given Putin greater freedom to consider using tactical nukes, smaller-yield warheads designed for use on the battlefield. And this change hasn't stayed on paper. In May 2024, Russia carried out military drills that explicitly simulated the use of tactical nuclear weapons. These weren't secret war games. They were a clear message to the world that, if needed, Moscow is ready to break the greatest taboo of the modern era. Experts warn that constantly invoking nuclear threats, even as a bluff, chips away at the global psychological threshold. What was once unthinkable starts to seem possible, and what feels possible can slowly begin to feel normal. That's the most dangerous part of the current crisis. Because even if Putin is just bluffing, the constant repetition of these threats is slowly pushing the world closer to the edge of the abyss. Trump's plan turned the United States into a profitable arsenal of war, but it also lit the fuse of something far more dangerous. Russia isn't just angry, it's cornered. Under pressure from Western allies, facing a heavily armed Ukraine, and now dealing with an American president who shows no hesitation in escalating the fight. And when a nuclear power feels it has no way out, decisions stop following the logic of diplomacy and begin to follow the instinct for survival. The threats coming from figures like Sladkov and Medvedev aren't just random provocations. They're part of a new Russian strategy, one that uses fear as a shield. But there's a problem with that kind of game. The more often a threat is repeated without consequences, the more it has to be amplified to keep being taken seriously. And if Putin believes no one fears his words anymore, he may decide that the only way to be heard is to act. The countdown has already begun, and the entire world is watching. But what about you? Do you think Putin is bluffing? Or have we already come too close to the point of no return? If you want to truly understand what's behind this war and how each move could drag the world into something much bigger, subscribe to the channel now, hit the bell, leave a like, and we'll see you in the next video.